Hello, and welcome back to another episode of What the Hack. Today we're going to be learning about conditionals and decision making. Conditionals use a special type of variable called a Boolean. Unlike a string or an integer, which can be assigned many different possible values, a Boolean can only be either true or false, but not both. Boolean values are used in logical expressions. For example, the logical expression 5 is greater than 2 will evaluate to true, and the logical expression 2 is greater than 5 will evaluate to false. So how do we do comparison in Python? Well, we have greater than and less than, which are pretty much the same as they are in math. We also have greater than or equal to, and less than or equal to. These look a little bit different than the ones in math, but are still quite intuitive, right? Last but not least, we have equals and not equals. And yep, you guessed it, they compare if two values are equal or not equal, respectively. But unlike the previous comparison signs, in addition to comparing the values of numbers, these can also be used to compare strings to see if they're equal. For example, if I have a string variable, name, I can check if name is equal to Bob or name is equal to Joe. And this actually checks if my name variable has the value Bob or has the value Joe. One of the most useful concepts Booleans are used for is decision making. And a common way to perform decision making in programming is using an if statement. An if statement looks like this. If, followed by a logical expression and a colon, and then under it will be the statements to be executed if that logical expression is true. Notice that there must be an indent before the statements you want to execute. This tells Python that the statement is within that if statement. Remember, indentation is very important in Python. I'll use a real-world example so it might be easier to understand. For example, we might say, if it is sunny, I will go to the park. But what if we want the program to do something else if the expression is false? Well, we can add an else clause right under the if statement, like so. And back to our real-world example, we can do that as well. The else must be on the same indentation as the if it's connected to, and the statements within the else clause must be indented, similar to the if statement. Now our program will run like this. If the expression is true, run the statements right under the if. Otherwise, run the statements under the else. Because an expression is a Boolean, it can only evaluate to true or false, but not both. So either the statements under the if will be executed, or the statements under the else. Hopefully this is all making sense so far. I just have one more thing to introduce before I do some real coding examples with you. Now, a lot of times when we're making a decision, it's not just one choice or the other. Usually, we'll have more than two options. Well, we can do that in Python as well, by adding elif clauses in between our if and else statements. So, it'll look something like this. And back to our real-world example, we can also change it up. So, if it is sunny, I will go to the park. Elif it is snowing, I will build a snowman. Else, I will stay at home. Elif is actually short for else if, which means otherwise if. So, if the initial expression is false, elif checks if another expression is true. If it is, it'll execute the statements within it, just like an if statement. You can put as many elif clauses between your if and else as you like. It just depends on how you want to create your program. Just make sure your elifs have the same indentation as your if and else, and the statements within that elif are also indented, similar to your if and else. One last thing to note is that Python checks the expressions in order, from top to bottom. So it will check the if statement, then the first elif if you have one, then the second elif if you have one, and so on and so forth. And once one of the expressions evaluates to true, the statements within that will be executed, and then it will actually skip the rest of the elifs and else, and start running the code that comes immediately after the else. This might be a little bit difficult to understand when I'm just saying it, so I will actually show you how this works later, so you can physically see what I mean. So let's get into some coding. So booleans are a type of variable. So we can actually create one. Let's call it Sunny. And we can assign it either true or false. So for now, I'll just assign it to true. And if we print the type of this variable now, remember you can check the type of a variable, and we run it. It shows us it's a boolean, or bool for short. Now we can do some comparison statements as well, because recall that a logical expression evaluates to a boolean, so either true or false. So let's see. 5 is greater than 2. 5 is indeed greater than 2. So this gives us true. And if we put in here a false statement, 3 is greater than 7, this gives us false. And remember, we can do comparison with strings as well, but only to check for equality, so only using the equals sign. So let's say I have a variable name called Bob. Let's do Bob with a capital B. Now we can check if name is we can compare name to Bob. So because these two Bobs are exactly the same, this gives us true. But notice, even if I just change the capitalization, it's a different word now. It's a different string, so it gives us false. Now let's create a simple program that asks the user for their age and then tells them what category they're in. Let's see, age program. So do you guys remember how to ask for an input? Well, first let's create a variable called age, which is where we'll assign their input. And then we ask for an input by using the input function. Say, how old are you? Let's see, colon. So this will now ask the user for an input of their age, and we'll store it in the variable age. So let's add a comment here, ask user for age. Oh, and one important thing I actually forgot, we have to make sure to change it into an integer. So remember, the input is a string, and we have to change it to an integer because we're going to be comparing that to other integers. So if 19 years old or older, they are legal. So we're going to be using the if statement we learned today. So if age is greater or equal to 19, then we can print you are legal. Okay, so let's run this program. So it asks me for the age. I am 27. And indeed, I am legal. So what if the user is not 19 or older? Well, we can put the else. And remember, the else has to match the indentation of the if. And then the statements within the else are indented. So if they're under 19, then we print you are a minor. So now, if I say I am 16, it tells me I am a minor. We can add more options as well. Let's say we want to add a teenager category. So if they are not greater or equal to 19, if their age is not greater or equal to 19, if their age is greater or equal to 13, we can say, oops, you are a teenager. And then if they're not greater or equal to 13, then let's change this to you are a child. Okay, so let's run this program a couple times. So we'll start with 27. So we're legal. If we run it again, let's say we're 16 now. It tells me I'm a teenager. And one last time, let's say I'm 5 years old. I am a child. Oh, one more thing I forgot to mention was the order of execution. So remember I mentioned the if statement. It checks the first if, and if it's not true, then it checks elif. And then if that's not true, then it checks else. But if any of these are true, it skips the rest of them. So for example, I'm going to put something here at the end saying this is the end to show you how this works. So if I run this, and let's say my age is 27. So 27 is greater than 19. So it's going to print you are legal, And it's actually going to skip all the way down and just start from here. Print, this is the end. So you can actually see that in action here. So it prints you are legal. It does not check this again because 27 is greater or equal to 13. But it skips this, skips the else, and starts printing from here. Well, that concludes this episode of What the Hack. We've left some activities for you to try at home. Feel free to explore and see what kind of programs you can come up with. Thank you again so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.